want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Welcome back to another installment of The Best Movie You Never Saw, and this week we're going to take a look at Running Scared. No, not the Wayne Kramer version of Running Scared that starred the late Paul Walker, rather the 1986 version of Running Scared, directed by Peter Hyams and starring Billy Crystal and, of course, the late Gregory Hines. Now, Peter Hyams was a pretty interesting director. In the 1980s, he kind of went back and forth between these studio programmers. He did great movies like Capricorn 1, which is a really cool little movie about a faked mission to Mars. Outland, which is an underrated Sean Connery movie, which is kind of a remake of High Noon set on Jupiter's moon. Then he did 2010, which was the sequel to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. You'd think that making a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey would be an absolutely insane thing for somebody to do and a surefire way to fail, but you know what? Peter Hyams actually pulled it off. The movie was a critical success and a financial success too. That immediately put him on the A-list as a director, and MGM, who had produced 2010, was kind of flopping around at that time trying to stay current. They decided to jump on a bandwagon for a genre that was doing pretty well, the buddy cop movie. Now, this was before Lethal Weapon, where that genre really exploded, and in some ways, Running Scared is kind of a dry run for Lethal Weapon, as the dynamic is kind of similar. But if Running Scared is based on anything, it's definitely based on Walter Hill's 48 Hours, which teamed up Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy's Convict in a fun action comedy, which was, of course, a massive financial success. So, in Running Scared, what they did is they took another SNL alum, Billy Crystal, and teamed him up with Gregory Hines, who was having a really good run at the box office at the time. He had been in The Cotton Club, which was of course a disaster, but he had gotten really good reviews for the movie. And then he was in White Nights opposite Mikhail Baryshnikov, which was a surprise success at the box office, and spawned the song Say You, Say Me by Lionel Richie, which became a staple of FM radio throughout the 80s. So they teamed up Crystal and Gregory Hines in this rough and tumble cop comedy. MGM obviously put a lot of money into this film, and the action scenes are pretty nifty. They obviously expected it to be a big hit, and at the time hot soundtracks were a big part of movie going, with movies like Flashdance and Beverly Hills Cop, which went on to drive profits at the box office and of course sold records, making everybody happy. So they actually hired Rod Temperton, who was the producer of the Thriller soundtrack, to put together a soundtrack of non-stop pop tunes, and one of them, Sweet Freedom by Doobie Brothers singer Mike McDonald, even went on to hit the Billboard Top 10 and certainly helped the box office. So the reviews for this movie were kind of mixed, where people said that it didn't really know what it was, a comedy or an action movie, and I think a lot of people had a hard time accepting Billy Crystal as a quote-unquote action star, even at the time, which was of course before When Harry Met Sally or City Slickers. That said, it was actually a box office hit. It made $38 million, which was pretty good in 1986 money, and for a while it looked like there was actually going to be a sequel called Running Scared All Over the World, which would have taken them to Europe. Kind of interesting, because who knows, if that movie had gotten made, maybe it would have turned into a big franchise. We'll never really know, but for some reason they just couldn't get a good script together, and neither Hines nor Crystal seemed to be interested in doing it without the right script. Too bad, because their chemistry is really good, and apparently the two guys got along famously. Within a year or two, though, it was obvious that they would never be able to do a sequel, because Crystal's career as a comic leading man really took off. He did When Harry Met Sally, which went on to become this classic, as well as City Slickers. He was having a great run at the box office, and to be honest, it would have been really weird if he had gone and done an action movie when he was known for kind of these middle-aged romantic leading man roles. Just wouldn't have worked, so Running Scared unfortunately became something of a footnote. Now, I know what you're thinking. Billy Crystal is an action star? This is a movie that I've always had kind of a hard time convincing people actually exists, because, you know, people don't think of Billy Crystal running around with an Uzi shooting bad guys. But it's true. They made an action movie with Billy Crystal, and you know what? He's a pretty good lead. Him and Hines really have great chemistry, and it's kind of a Beverly Hills Cop style vehicle, allowing them to crack wise and take down baddies. Both acquit themselves pretty well.
I can't believe that you missed all 6 shots.
What are you talking about? I hit the windshield 6 times in a row.
No. Excuse me, sir. All 6 of mine hit. I don't know where the hell you were. I'm the one who made him swerve.
Oh, you made him sweat.
Yes,
You
sir.
always aim low anyway.
Oh, let's do height jokes now, Ray. That's really good.
And it always seems strange to me that Gregory Hines didn't become an absolute megastar, because, you know, he had it all. He had a really distinctive look. He had a lot of chemistry. He could dance. He was funny. He was built. He was kind of, you know, acceptable in any genre, but for some reason it just never really coalesced for him. And unfortunately, he died at the very tragically young age of 57, never really crossing over into that next level of stardom, which I think probably seemed assured around this time. He had loads of charisma. So Running Scared is kind of an interesting movie. In the film, Billy Crystal and Gregory Hines play these two Chicago cops that take down a drug dealer played by Jimmy Smits. Yes, Jimmy Smits of LA Law, the guy that all of our moms had crushes on back in the 80s. Now, due to the bureaucracy of the job, they're not able to keep him in jail, so they decide to take early retirement in Key West, even buying a bar. But after they give their captain 30 days notice, they discover that Julio Mendez, the drug dealer that they're after, is out on the streets and as bad as ever. So they vow to take him down before their retirement starts. Complicating things, Billy Crystal is in the midst of a divorce from Darlene Flugel, who you guys will know from a Best Movie I Never Saw a couple weeks ago, To Live and Die in LA. She unfortunately also died young a few years ago. And the movie becomes kind of a race against time. She ends up in jeopardy, Billy Crystal and her fall back in love. Gregory Hines kind of doesn't want to give up the action of being a Chicago cop. There's a lot of gunfights, a lot of car chases, including a really good one along the L tracks in Chicago, which I think is one of the better action scenes of the 80s, and it's a lot of fun. Now, if anything though, the reason I think maybe Running Scared had a hard time really kind of coalescing as this genre classic is that in some ways it got the mixture a little bit wrong. You'd think with this cast they would have probably emphasized comedy over action, but instead they emphasized action over comedy. I think that makes it probably more of an entertaining film, at least to me anyway, as a hardcore action fan. But I think that if they had emphasized comedy a little more like the Beverly Hills Cop movies did, it might have gotten a bigger audience. But alas, as I said, it did pretty well. The reason the movie though is fairly short on laughs despite the two big stars is probably due to the fact that Peter Hyams was never really known as a comedy director. The only other comedy that he did was Stay Tuned starring John Ritter, which was a box office disaster, but as a kid, I thought it was a great movie, so what does anybody else know? Luckily, though, action is really something that Hymes was good at, and there's some really good set pieces, like I mentioned, that amazing car chase on the L track, and then there's a final shootout in an abandoned mini-mall, with Hynes making memorable use of a window washer's rig to wreak havoc on the baddies. Fun footnote, one of the guys in the movie that they arrest early on and carry around with them and who has a pretty gruesome death scene is none other than Joe Pantoliano. That's right, Joey Pants, who always kind of looked the same even when he was in his 20s. Now, even the critics that gave Running Scared a hard time did give it a certain amount of credit for that amazing car chase on the L tracks, with the tension only broken by Crystal's constant mugging as Hynes mans the wheel of the bulletproof taxi that they've been given by their kind of police department Q. That's a weird thing also about 80s cop movies. They always had a Q type figure.
Ace, it is perfect.
Got your siren, you got your radio, you got your flashing lights, and you got your fare meter. I don't know, Ace, there's something not quite right here. Well, it's your old car with a couple of modifications. They even covered the windows with bulletproof plexiglass. You can't roll them down, but then again, you can't get shot through them either.
There's a really great line in the car chase where Billy Crystal complains to Gregory Hines.
Why weren't we on that trip?
Well, now you're going to criticize my driving?
Well, it's just that you get to do all the dangerous stuff and I get to parallel park.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, Running Scared is actually available on Blu-ray in a nice HD transfer, and there's a really cool extra in the film where it's a behind-the-scenes documentary shot by Billy Crystal's entourage, where you get a lot of really interesting outtakes of Crystal and Hynes just kind of goofing around and having a good time. It looked like the two guys really did get along, and they have really good chemistry, as I said, and it's too bad that a Running Scared 2 and a Running Scared 3 never happened. Jimmy Smits is also good as the bloodthirsty villain, Julio, and I can see why it kind of put him on the map. My only complaint is that the big theme song from the film Sweet Freedom by Michael McDonald, for some reason, isn't available on Spotify. I mean, they've got every other Michael McDonald song, but no Sweet Freedom? What gives? I really do recommend checking out Running Scared. It maybe isn't an 80s classic, or at least not on the level of something like Lethal Weapon, but if you like 80s buddy cop movies, Running Scared is going to scratch that itch. I give it a definite recommend, and I hope that people check it out. It's a really fun movie. If you like what you see, make sure to please subscribe to our channel, tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.
want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Bumbray here again for JoBlo.com with another video edition of The Best Movie You Never Saw. And this week we're taking a look at REMO WILLIAMS, The Adventure Begins. And, well, ends because this movie never got a sequel. In it, Fred Ward, yes, none other than Fred Ward, plays a New York cop who's unwillingly recruited as an assassin for a top-secret government agency named Cure. Subtle. Rechristened REMO WILLIAMS, he's sent on the trail of an unscrupulous weapons dealer, but first must survive his training with a Korean martial arts master, played, of course, by who else but the very white Joel Grey. 1985, eh? And of course, the character he plays, Chun, is a master of the fictional martial art Sinanju. Now, in addition to Fred Ward and Joel Grey, two action movie icons, if ever there were any, it also co-stars another action movie icon, Wilford Brimley.
Here, drink. But do not spill.
Yes, Wilford Brimley. Diabetes.
Diabetes, 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 diabetes.
Thank you, Wilford. Diabetes.
And, of course, Kate Mulgrew, who later on would become super famous on Star Trek Voyager. The music is very good, and it's by Craig Safan, and it's directed by Guy Hamilton, who directed the James Bond movies Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and The Man with the Golden Gun. The adventure begins and ends with this, the lone big screen adventure of REMO WILLIAMS, the veteran of well over 100 pulp novels that were published as the Destroyer series, all of which were written by Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir. Now, this was an attempt by Dick Clark of all people, that's right, Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve, and the then fledgling Orion Pictures to launch their own James Bond-style series of adventures. Now, while people may laugh at the attempt now, they definitely had reason to think that this could work, with the brain trust at Orion, the same bunch who worked at United Artists when the James Bond films were initially greenlit back in the early 60s. They even managed to get some legit 007 veterans like director Guy Hamilton and co-writer Christopher Wood, who wrote The Spy Who Loved Me and, well, Moonraker.
Well, here's to us.
To write the screenplay. So people probably thought that, lightning could strike twice. And I have to say, REMO WILLIAMS, The Adventure Begins, didn't get very bad reviews when it came out. It was actually fairly well received, but financially, it was a bit of a flop, opening in 4th place at the box office behind Commando, Jagged Edge, and Silver Bullet, eventually eking out only a $14 million gross, not nearly enough to sustain a franchise. But eventually it did well enough on cable and VHS that a pilot TV movie with a different cast, including, yes, another white guy playing the Korean Chun, this time Roddy McDowall, but ultimately it all went nowhere. Now, REMO WILLIAMS, The Adventure Begins was a movie I really loved as a young teen. About 12 or 13 years old, I remember catching a chunk of it on TBS one evening, which encouraged me to venture to my local video store, look in the archives, and find the battered old VHS copy of the movie that at the time was well over 10 years old. And I have to say, I really loved this movie when I saw it. I probably just about wore the videotape out because I watched it over and over and over again. And what I liked about it then and now is how REMO WILLIAMS is kind of unique as far as Hollywood heroes go, especially for the 80s. At this point, Fred Ward was already middle-aged, and he looks like a blue-collar regular guy, and his recruitment and eventual transformation into an unstoppable hero who is able to breathe underwater for an hour and dodge bullets at close range was exciting escapism for me at the time. Basically, REMO WILLIAMS is a Jedi. Is it realistic? Not even slightly. It's pretty much science fiction, but if you get with the vibe, it's kind of fun. Now, more than 35 years after its initial release, REMO WILLIAMS holds up pretty well, but there are some massive caveats. And of course, the elephant in the room is the very white Joel Grey, best known as the MC from Cabaret, as the Korean Chun. Now, people were actually not upset about this casting back then. His performance was actually so well received at the time that he garnered a Golden Globe nomination, and the makeup that was used to transform him into a Korean was actually nominated for an Oscar. But I have to say, it's all very cringeworthy now. I mean, why? Why could they not get a Korean actor to play a Korean character? It makes no sense even for 1985. His chemistry, however, with Fred Ward is pretty good, and their banter is fun, and I always enjoyed Chun's love of American soap operas.
No. I was going to be an all-American.
But I have to say, it's still a racist depiction, right down to him pronouncing his R's as L's and so on.
That is its sole secret, its only strength. You are here to conquer your childish fear of heights.
They maybe meant well, but it comes off as kinda nasty, even though he's ostensibly a heroic character. It's like something out of the old Charlie Chan Fu Manchu era, and probably seemed very dated in 1985. But then again, 2 years later, they did a TV series, and again, Chun was played by a white guy. If you can ignore this, and it's a big if, I must admit, Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins still has a lot to offer, such as some really great stunt work and a few really cool action set pieces, plus that amazing score by Craig Safan, which ranks as one of the best action scores of the 80s. Sadly, the production apparently ran out of money towards the end of the shoot, meaning that the conclusion of the film is kind of anticlimactic, and the villain is a very generic type, the kind of guy that you'd see as the villain every week on the A-Team. In fact, I think he even probably played the villain at some point. But there are some really amazing scenes in this movie, especially the scene that's set at the Statue of Liberty. Now, around the time this movie was shot, the Statue of Liberty was actually undergoing construction, meaning it had some giant scaffolding surrounding it, and the production was able to use all this to brilliant effect in a show-stopping scene where Remo has to dodge assassins, one of whom is John Polito from all the Coen Brothers movies, while being chased all over. And it's a moment worthy of Hitchcock, with some dazzling stunt work, really cool music, and a couple really cool ass-kickings. Nothing in the movie, however, is quite able to match up to it, although I did like the part where he beats up the villain with diamonds on his teeth and uses them to cut glass. I mean, that's kind of cool. But otherwise, this is, I have to say, an absolutely classic moment in a movie that I don't think a lot of people know about. John Polito put his participation in this project succinctly in his Random Roles interview, saying, "I had one day, but I was doing this one day on the Statue of Liberty, which was in the process of being refurbished. So the island was closed to people for the most part. There was nobody there. We used the actors that were given permission to shoot, and that was it. And all I really did was chase the lead guy, Fred Ward, all over the Statue of Liberty. So I really had nothing to do." And the funny part of the movie is, and I'm kind of known at this point for my gravelly voice, but in fact, they dubbed in my first line with some actor from England. Well, I apologize, John Polito, but you know what? It's still a great scene. Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins is something of a niche title, but it's fared fairly well on Blu-ray. In North America, you can get it via Twilight Time's Movie on Demand series, and in R2, it's available in a really good extras-filled reissue by Arrow. Both editions of the movie are loaded with special features. And you want to hear something crazy? You know who almost played Remo Williams, and in fact was the finalist? Ed Harris. But I guess they didn't want a balding Remo Williams, which is, their loss, because Ed Harris went on to become a huge star and would have actually kind of been badass as Remo Williams. But alas, Fred Ward, pretty great in this role. Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins is a flawed but exciting piece of 80s action cinema. Ward is truly unique in the lead, and the movie is fast-paced and fun, although, as I said, the casting of Chun is problematic, and I know that some of you get annoyed when you say that things that were done at a certain time are problematic, but it can't be denied, it is problematic. It should have been an Asian actor. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now, but I have to say, if you can watch this movie in the right context, you're gonna have a lot of fun with it, and unapologetically, I still kind of love Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins, and you know what? I kind of wish the adventure had continued. There's been some talk of rebooting the series, and I think there's a whole bunch of actors that could potentially play Remo Williams, but we'll see. Until next time, for JoBlo.com, I'm Chris Bumbray.
as hard as you can.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Bumbry here again for JoBlo.com with another video edition of The Best Movie You Never Saw. And this week, we're taking a look at Best of the Best, starring Eric Roberts, James Earl Jones, Sally Kirkland, Philip Ree, and Chris Penn? Now, in this, a team of American martial artists, including single father Alex Grady, played by Roberts, are chosen to represent the United States in an international tournament, pitting them against Team Korea. Complicating things is the fact that the team's most skilled fighter, Tommy, played by Philip Ree, secretly plans to take his revenge against Team Korea leader Dae Han, played by his real-life brother Simon Ree, who years earlier killed his brother in a match. Now, in the late 80s, martial arts was firmly a part of the pop culture thanks to the legend of Bruce Lee, The Karate Kid, and a never-ending slew of ninja movies from Canon Films. Schools opened up in virtually every mall across North America, and guys like Steven Seagal, Chuck Norris, and especially Jean-Claude Van Damme were household names, and the martial arts tournament movie was a popular video store genre, with classics of the genre including Kickboxer, Bloodsport, and to a lesser extent, movies like Blood Fist, and many, many more. Now, unlike many of these films, except perhaps the Van Damme movies, Best of the Best got a major theatrical release in North America, and with its PG-13 rating, it's clear the makers were looking for some mainstream success, something along the lines of The Karate Kid. But for whatever reason, Best of the Best just absolutely tanked theatrically, maybe due to the fact that it was coming out from a relatively new studio at the time called The Movie Group. It only grossed $1.7 million, although its home video and cable success was so massive that we even got a theatrically released sequel in 1992, and then two further direct-to-video sequels that are only very loosely related to the first two in the mid-90s. Now, everybody seemed to have a good time doing this film. Eric Roberts himself, who starred in something like 1,000 movies, has said, "This was maybe the most fun physically I've ever had making movies. It was like boys camp. I got to go to work out the body every morning, then you'd go do the goju and get ready for the moves of the day, and then you'd go do the set and shoot karate movie. It ended up being a wonderful movie about triumph, and I'm very proud of the first film, Best of the Best. It's a really good movie." First, let me acknowledge the fact that to many of you reading this, Best of the Best is not particularly obscure. Sure, it was an absolute flop theatrically, but a generation of us grew up watching it, especially those of us who probably went and took karate lessons as kids. I know that it was a movie that I watched over and over and over again growing up, but the kids today do not know Best of the Best. They simply don't. It's not really available on many of the streaming sites. It's kind of obscure because the lead actors are pretty obscure. Eric Roberts has something of a cult status, but he's not exactly someone like a Nicolas Cage or something like that. It's a cult favorite for action fans because of its constant cable play in the 90s, specifically on the channel TBS, and sure enough it was successful enough to spawn a modest franchise, yet I firmly believe that just as many readers out there have never even heard of this late 80s flick, which is a cut above many of the martial arts movies of the era. Now, it was written by Philip Ree, who also starred in the film, and he said it came from the heart. It's based on my story when I competed in 1980 against the Korean team, which is kind of strange because Philip Ree's brother actually plays the villain in this movie. So he's avenging the brother that got killed who's on camera with him? Oh, I don't know exactly. Maybe he had another brother? I'm not sure, but anyway, it's pretty dramatic. For one thing though, Best of the Best is a lot more of a drama in the vein of something like The Karate Kid or Rocky than an all-out action flick, and I think that maybe disappointed some action fans when they were young. This isn't a Chuck Norris movie, and thank God it's not a Steven Seagal movie. It's not even really a Van Damme movie where Bloodsport and Kickboxer had him against these murderous adversaries that he had to destroy in the ring. This one, a lot of time is given to the personal lives of the athletes, with Eric Roberts, the heart and soul of the film, as injured fighter Alex Grady, who had to put his dreams on hold to raise his son as a single dad. One of the best subplots involves his son being injured in an accident and his choice to quit the team in order to be there with his kid, and you have to appreciate that the makers opted to hire a legitimate actor in Eric Roberts rather than a fighter to play the part. In his case, it pays off because he was in really good shape and he could reasonably approximate the on-screen action and actually seem like a credible fighter. That said, that decision to hire actors rather than martial artists backfires a bit when it comes to Chris Penn, who never ever convinces is literally one of the best martial artists in the country, although I guess he's fun in the part as the swaggering, somewhat racist, comic relief guy.
Hey, spare ribs! Now that's a white man's meal, Virg.
it works, and Chris Penn, I like him. I just don't know if I buy him in an action movie, or specifically a martial arts movie. What may surprise people, though, is the fact that Eric Roberts, despite his top billing, isn't actually the star. Rather, it's Philip Rhee, who wasn't even on the video store cover when I was a kid. In fact, Sally Kirkland was on the video store cover, and I imagine that a lot of people hadn't really heard of her at the time, although she had been nominated for an Oscar. And James Earl Jones. I mean, they made it look like it was an Eric Roberts, James Earl Jones, Sally Kirkland action movie. Really, the two of them play supporting roles, and Philip Rhee is the actual star, as Tommy. He gets the most brutal scrap, as well as the big arc, with it playing out in a totally refreshing way as opposed to most 80s action flicks. I also appreciate the distinctly non-xenophobic vibe. While yes, for much of the film, Team Korea is presented as this feared enemy, when it comes down to the tournament itself, they prove to be not all that different from our American heroes, and the ending is one of the best guy cry moments ever, along with that classic tearjerker Brian song.
I love Brian Piccolo. And I'd like all of you to love him too.
Well, a bit cheesy in that distinct 80s way, meaning lots of scenes of Ray riding around on his motorcycle with a power ballad playing in the background and a long montage at the beginning featuring Eric Roberts working as a welder in a body shop with a hard rockin' song playing in the background. It's still a major cut above for the genre.
Now is the hour for you to stop the world.
Roberts was at his peak in this era, having come off 3 Golden Globe nominations for King of the Gypsies, Star 80, and the amazing Runaway Train, as well as an Oscar nod for Runaway Train, although he probably should have been nominated and in fact should have won for Bob Fosse's Star 80. It's the fact that he played such a scummy character, people weren't really able to tell that, well, he was actually just acting. Also, check out Pope of Greenwich Village opposite Mickey Rourke. That's a damn good movie too. Eric Roberts puts all of his heart into this part, and while he's maybe a bit too over the top in his emoting, in that I don't think there's ever been an action star that's cried on screen as much as he does here.
It's Daddy. Daddy's here.
I still love him in the part, and Rhee also should have gotten a lot more roles. He's a martial artist, but you know what, he's pretty damn good as an actor. Now, some are probably going to scoff at the idea of James Earl Jones as a martial arts coach because, I mean, it looks like he couldn't possibly throw a kick. Although, to be fair, James Earl Jones in the 70s was actually a pretty badass boxer, which you could see in The Great White Hope. He was just the man as far as authority figures went in the 1980s, so even though he doesn't look necessarily like a martial artist, you accept him. And his presence on the DVD cover, in fact, probably did help this one infiltrate pop culture to some degree, because he was kind of the man in this era. The best scene in this movie, or at least the signature scene for Best of the Best, is when Eric Roberts is having a scrap with probably the second most badass bad guy in the film, and he pops his shoulder. Now, when a hero dislocates his shoulder in an action movie of this era, it's usually pretty dramatic. I mean, think of Mel Gibson as Riggs popping it back in himself. Now, Mel Gibson has some pretty strong competition in Eric Roberts here as far as it goes to popping bones back into their sockets, and I love it when he gets Philip Rhee, or rather Tommy, to pop it back in and just keep saying over and over again, "Pop it, Tommy, pop it, pop it."
Do it! Do it! Do it!
Say "Pop it, Tommy" to any legitimate action fan of a certain age, and 100% they're gonna know what you're talking about. Now, Best of the Best can actually be a little bit tricky to find, but it's out there on DVD Blu-ray if you're looking for it, although it doesn't seem to be available digitally at all. I looked for it on Amazon Prime, on Tubi TV, on Netflix, on iTunes, on Google Play, couldn't find it anywhere. So it takes a little bit of searching for it, although it's available if you know where to look, if you know what I mean. Now, Best of the Best is a prime serving of 80s cheese with the added benefit that, in addition to hitting all the familiar beats of the genre that you'd expect, it has a heart beneath its brawny exterior, and I found it quite inspiring as a kid, and it's well worth a watch or a revisit. And also, to this day, I've never seen a man cry as much as Eric Roberts does in this movie. For JoBlo.com, I'm Chris Bumbre.
Today, you have a chance to be the best martial artists in the world. It's up to you. If you give everything you've got, everything, with all your heart, you'll be winners. That I promise you. You can be the best of the best.